What is up, YouTubians? Kuda Malloy here, coming at you with another exciting video. I was about to eat lunch and then I figured, okay, let me make another video because the videos wait for nobody. All right, so tire pressure gauge. Why did this JACO ElitePro 0 to 60 psi tire pressure gauge make my best bang for the buck list? Let's go over that and a whole lot more. So this is the package that it comes in. This is basically the box. When you open up the box, the tire pressure gauge itself is in bubble wrap, so that's kind of cool. You also get a warranty card. It explains to you how to do that. You can either do it through your phone by scanning a, what is that, QRC code? Is that what it's called? Or you can just call the number, or you can email them, yada yada. And then you also get this quick guide. So basically it's telling you that it is ANSI certified, which is the American National Standards Institute. So it's kind of cool. It's showing you that it has a bleeder valve, built-in valve, has two functions. It's showing you that the piece is swivels. So this piece swivels, as you can see, and then this piece on the end also swivels, as you can see. And then it's also showing you that it is glow in the dark, which is kind of cool. So let me see if I can do this. It's obviously daytime right now, but when you go in there, you can kind of sort of tell that that it does turn like a shade of green. It's too hard to tell during the day, but you get the idea. It is glow in the dark, which is kind of cool. All right, let's talk about the measurements. So when you stretch this thing out from one end to the other, it's just a tad over 17 inches, which is kind of cool. So it's not necessarily too long, it's not necessarily too short, but basically this piece here is about 4 inches, and then this piece here is about 3 inches, as you can see. Just so you can kind of get the idea. And then it does have the swivels, like I already mentioned. It's got that. Let's talk about the bleeder function. So basically, when you measure your tire pressure, you know, one hand's going to go here. You're going to be holding this up against your tire valve stem. And then with this hand, you could either lay it on the floor or you could leave it in your hand. But what's kind of cool is that when you take a measurement, some tires, you know, like if you're running like a dually system on your pickup truck or whatever, some tires, you know, you have to really reach in there to get to the valve stem, or just depending on the awkwardness of the angle of where the tire stem is. So it's kind of cool that you take a pressure reading, you know, take this off of the tire stem and it'll hold its pressure. So I just kind of blew into this real quick to get it up to 2 psi. But when you push this bleeder valve, so you can see it went back down to 0. So that's kind of cool that it holds the reading, and that's actually, I think, what JACO recommends, is that you take a pressure reading, you know, check out what your reading was. Oh, okay, I was at 2 psi, and then go ahead and release the bleeder valve to get it back down to 0 before you put it away for storage. So that's kind of cool. Some of you off-road people, let's say you're going on an ATV or an off-road vehicle, some sort of truck, a motorcycle, whatever it is, and you have to deflate your tires. The reason why you would deflate your tires is to get a bigger, wider contact patch onto the surface. So if you're running over sand, like let's say you're going to Glamis in California or Pismo Beach in California, or you know, the Arizona desert, you're doing like a Moab thing, you know, whatever it is, and you wanted to release the tire pressure, what you would do is hold this against the tire valve stem, and then while holding this in your hand, you could use the bleeder valve to release the pressure. So that's kind of cool that it does give you that bleeder option. Okay, so one of the main reasons, I guess, why I chose the 0 to 60 range was because I know that what JACO is telling me is that the maximum pressure that this gauge will read to is 60 psi. So my tires only need to be inflated to, let's say, 35 psi. So why didn't I get a 40 psi gauge? Well, the reason for that is because this is just my opinion. I don't know if there's any scientific evidence to back this. It's worked for me in the past. I'm sharing some knowledge. If it works for you too, great. More power to us all. But my experience has been figure out what pressure you typically would run your tires at. So let's say, like in my case, it's 35 psi, right? I don't want a gauge that goes only to 35 psi, because that would mean that every time I go to 35 psi, I'm putting the maximum amount of stress on this gauge every time I use it, right? So if the tire pressure gauge only went to 35 psi, every time I go to 35 psi, I'm putting the maximum amount of stress that the gauge can handle. What I want to do is I want to be somewhere in the middle range, right? So if my max psi was 35, theoretically, if I wanted to be in the middle of that range, I would want a gauge that went to 70 psi. And there are some out there, there are some other gauges out there that do go to 70, but in my honest opinion, I like JACO. I really like their brand. I feel like it's built well. Remember, it's certified from ANSI, which is also important. So this was the closest thing I could find to a tire pressure gauge that had the bleeder valve, something that was manual versus like a digital gauge, and something with a sweeping dial so I could see the progression of the air coming, bleeding back out of it, or etc. But 60 psi was the closest thing I could get to being in the middle range of the psi that my working psi, or the psi that I'm going to be using the most. So that way I'm only putting on half of the stress, if that makes sense, right? So if I'm running tire pressure at 40, I'd want to get an 80 psi gauge, if that makes any sense at all. So that way you're only putting on half of the maximum amount of stress onto the gauge at any given time. What does that translate into? Longer life is what my experience has been. Like, I noticed that I might get, you know, a few extra years out of a tire pressure gauge if I only use the like halfway or 50% of the maximum amount of pressure that the gauge will read up to. Does that make sense? I hope it does. All right, guys, there is a link to the description down below, or there is a link to this product in the description down below. There's also a like button and there's also a subscribe button. Please make sure to hit both of those. For motorcycle riders, I love this thing. It's compact when it's all folded up. As you can see, it's about 7 inches or so when you fold it on itself. You know, there you go. And then for car, truck, SUV use, you know, this thing is great. It gives you, the hose length gives you just enough reach to get into those, you know, hard to reach areas where you need to take a pressure reading, etc. Everything that comes in the box, by the way, is this quick guide. This is your warranty card. There is also a discount card that came with mine that had like a discount code. So next time I buy JACO products, there's a code there. Obviously, I didn't put in here because that's my code. And when you buy your kit, you will have your card specific to you, and it'll have your code to receive some discounts from them as well. This is the front of the box. This is the back of the box. If you want to see that real quick. So ElitePro tire pressure gauge, 60 psi, 30 years experience in the industry. That's important to me. It's got the 360 swivels, which we already showed you that this thing swivels, and this side swivels. It also has your built-in air bleeder valve, which is right there. It's got your rubberized protective guard, which is this part. And by the way, if you were curious about that, the total diameter of this thing is almost 3 inches. It's 2 3/4. But the inner diameter of just the gauge itself is 2 inches, as you can see right there. So that's kind of cool. And then you get large 2-inch glow-in-the-dark dial, which I just showed you. And it does, if I can try this one more time, let's try to get it to go green. You can kind of sort of tell. It's a light green because I'm in broad daylight, but you get the idea. And then 100% lifetime warranty. So definitely make sure to use your warranty card. So there you go, guys. Link to this product is in the description below. Like button and your subscribe button. Go ahead and hit both of those for me. I'd really appreciate it. Take care, guys. Scooter Malloy, and I will catch you guys on the next video.